The dying world. The crystal spires of Velthra had once caught the light of 3 suns, scattering rainbows across the silver valleys below. Now they reflected only fire. Mira Ashton stood at the observation deck of the council tower, watching another district burn. Smoke rose in black columns, darkening skies that had known only peace for 3 centuries. She pressed her palm against the transparent wall, feeling it tremble with each distant explosion. 2 years she'd lived here as Earth's diplomatic liaison. 2 years of learning the Veltheran language, their customs, their gentle philosophy of existence. 2 years of almost forgetting what humanity was truly capable of. Ambassador Ashton. The voice behind her was soft, musical despite its tremor. She turned to see Torvain, his tall frame draped in the ceremonial robes of the High Council. His silver skin seemed to glow in the dim emergency lighting, but his amber eyes held nothing but exhaustion and fear. Please, Torvain. We're past titles now. Mira crossed the room to him, noting how his usually straight posture had begun to bend under the weight of leadership. What did the council decide? His silence was answer enough. She watched him move to the central holographic display, where red markers indicated Scarith forces advancing on 3 fronts. The enemy had been methodical, crushing each city before moving to the next. They weren't just conquering, they were erasing. We activate the beacon tonight, he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. The ancient protocols, the summons. Mira felt her breath catch. Torvain, no. You don't understand what that means. I understand we're dying. He turned to her, and for the first time since the invasion began, she saw tears forming in those alien eyes. Another week, perhaps 2, and there will be no Velthara. No Veltharans. General Kravik has made his intentions clear. Total extermination. But calling for Earth's military. Mira struggled for words. How could she explain? The United Earth Defense Forces weren't peacekeepers or guardians. They were the galaxy's nightmare, spoken of in whispered warnings across 100 worlds. When humanity sends help, we don't send mercy. Torvain stepped closer and she caught the scent of ozone and ash that clung to his robes. He'd been in the lower districts today, helping evacuate civilians. I've read your history files, Mira, all of them, even the ones you marked classified. I know what happened at the siege of Proxima. I know about the cleansing of Tau Ceti. Then you know, I know we have no choice. His hand found hers, his touch cool and steady. Perhaps your people are monsters. Perhaps they'll leave scars that never heal. But dead worlds bear no scars at all. The building shook as another bombardment struck nearby. Automated systems flickered, struggling to maintain basic functions. Through the window, Mira could see Scarith fighters streaking across the twilight sky, their weapons painting the horizon in shades of death. How long until the beacon is ready? She asked quietly. The technicians are preparing it now. They say the signal will reach Earth space in approximately 40 hours. Torvain's grip on her hand tightened. Will they come? Mira thought of the fleet that would answer that call. She thought of Captain Elena Voss, whose reputation preceded her across known space. She thought of the ships with names like Nightfall and Reckoning and Absolute Zero. She thought of soldiers trained not to win battles but to end them, permanently. They'll come, she said, pulling Torvain closer as another explosion rattled the tower. God help us all, they'll come. The beacon activated at midnight, a pulse of blue energy that tore through the darkness and reached for the stars. Mira stood beside Torvain in the communications chamber, watching as the ancient device, older than human spaceflight, older than Earth's first wars, sent its desperate message into the void. Around them, Veltharan technicians worked in silence, their movements precise despite the fear that hung heavy in the recycled air. The room hummed with power, screens displaying the signal's strength and trajectory. It's done, the senior technician announced, her voice hollow. The call has been sent. Mira felt Torvain's hand find hers again in the darkness. His skin was cold, trembling slightly. She wanted to offer comfort, to tell him everything would be fine. But she'd never been good at lying. Outside, the 3 suns began to rise over Velthara's wounded surface. Somewhere in the void between stars, a message raced toward Earth, a plea for salvation, a summons for monsters. And in the distance, General Kravik's forces prepared their final assault, unaware that they had already lost, not the battle, but their lives. Humanity was coming, and the galaxy would remember what that meant. The storm gathers, the bridge of the EDS Nightfall was a cathedral of controlled chaos. Holographic displays floated in the darkness, casting blue light across the faces of officers who moved with practiced precision. Captain Elena Voss stood at the center of it all, her dark eyes fixed on the tactical readout that showed Velthara's system 30 hours away. Signal analysis complete. "Captain," Lieutenant Marcus Flynn reported from his station. His voice was steady, professional, but Elena caught the slight tension in his shoulders. She knew that posture, had memorized it during late nights in her quarters, before duty had complicated everything between them. "Genuine distress beacon. Veltharan origin codes verified. The Scarith Empire has committed at least 40 capital ships to the siege." "Only 40? Elena allowed herself a cold smile. They should have brought more. Around her, the bridge crew exchanged glances. They'd served under Elena Voss long enough to know what that tone meant. The Nightfall was the tip of humanity's spear, and when it struck to kill. "Fleet status?" she asked, moving toward the tactical display. The hologram showed 63 human warships in formation, each one a masterpiece of destructive engineering. "All ships report ready for combat operations," Marcus said, his fingers dancing across his console. "The Valkyrie and Thunderchild are requesting permission to advance as Vanguard." "Denied." "We move as one." Elena studied the display, calculating vectors and outcomes. "Marcus, pull up everything we have on Scarith military doctrine." There was the briefest hesitation before he responded, a fraction of a second where their past hung in the air between them. 6 months since they'd ended things. 6 months of working side by side, pretending the nights they'd shared had never happened. "Their tactics favor overwhelming force and terror," Marcus said, pulling up files. "They don't take prisoners. Standard practice is complete eradication of native populations before colonization." "Good." Elena's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Then they'll understand what's coming." The turbolift doors opened and Mira Ashton's voice crackled through the communication system from Velthara's surface. "Captain Voss, this is Ambassador Ashton. I need to brief you on civilian population centers and evacuation protocols." Elena activated the comm. "Ambassador, how many civilians are we protecting?" "Approximately 2 million survivors, scattered across 12 shelter zones." There was exhaustion in Mira's voice, and something else, fear that wasn't for herself. "Captain, the Veltharans. They're terrified, not just of the Scarith. They've heard the stories about us." "Good," Elena said flatly. "Fear keeps people in shelters. Fear keeps them alive." "Elena, Captain, some of them are asking if we're going to be worse than their current nightmare." The bridge fell silent. Marcus looked up from his station, his green eyes meeting Elena's for the first time in weeks. She saw the question there, the one he'd asked the night they fell apart. "How much of yourself do you lose leading monsters?" "Tell them this," Elena said carefully. "Humanity doesn't fight half wars. We don't negotiate with genocidal empires. When we arrive, the Scarith will cease to exist in this system. What the Veltharans do with that freedom afterward is their choice. But survival first, judgment later. Understood, Captain." Mira's voice was quieter now. "And Captain, thank you for coming. We haven't done anything yet." Elena cut the connection and turned to her crew. "Battle stations in 24 hours. I want firing solutions prepared for every Scarith ship in the system. Prioritize their command vessels and troop carriers. Nothing with a Scarith signature leaves this system alive." The crew moved to execute her orders, and Elena found herself alone at the tactical display with Marcus lingering nearby. "Permission to speak freely, Captain?" he asked. "Since when do you ask permission?" Despite everything, she felt the corner of her mouth twitch. Marcus stepped closer, lowering his voice. "The Veltharans aren't wrong to be afraid. We're about to paint their sky with blood. Some of them will have nightmares about us for generations. Better nightmares than extinction. Is it?" He met her gaze fully now, and she saw the man she'd fallen for beneath the uniform. The man who still believed humanity could be better than its reputation. "Every time we do this, Elena, we prove the galaxy right about us. We're the monsters they whisper about." Elena was quiet for a moment, watching the stars stream past on the viewport. "You know what I realized, Marcus? The galaxy doesn't whisper about the Scarith. They don't tell stories about the raiders who glass planets for sport. You want to know why? Why? Because the monsters everyone fears are the ones still alive." She turned back to him, her expression hardening. "The Scarith chose genocide. They chose to make this personal. And now they're going to learn why humanity survived every attempt to wipe us out. We don't just fight back, we make sure the fight never happens again. Marcus held her gaze for a long moment, and she saw the conflict there. The tactical officer who agreed with her strategy fighting with the man who'd once held her and whispered that they didn't have to be what the galaxy feared. Get some rest, Elena said softly. Tomorrow we show them what humanity means. He nodded and turned to leave, but paused at the turbo lift. Elena, for what it's worth, I understand why you do this. I just hope someday you'll forgive yourself for being good at it. The doors closed behind him, leaving Elena alone with her fleet and her thoughts. On the view screen, Velthara's sun grew steadily brighter. Somewhere on that dying world, Mira was probably trying to comfort frightened aliens. Somewhere in the orbital space above it, Scarith commanders were celebrating their imminent victory. Neither of them knew what was coming. Neither of them understood that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't its technology or tactics. It was the simple, terrible fact that when humans decided someone needed to die, they died completely. Elena pulled up the final attack plans, her fingers tracing vectors of destruction across the holographic display. Tomorrow the Scarith would learn. Tomorrow the Veltharans would learn. Tomorrow the galaxy would remember why humanity's answer to distress calls came with a warning label. The storm was gathering, and Elena Voss stood at its center, calculating the exact moment to unleash hell. First Blood, the Scarith command ship Bleeding Fang, dominated Velthara's orbital space like a predator circling wounded prey. General Kravik stood on his bridge, watching the final bombardment patterns light up his screens. Victory was hours away. The last Veltharan defensive platforms had fallen, and ground forces were preparing for the final sweep. General, his sensor officer called out, his voice uncertain. We're detecting spatial distortions at the system's edge. Multiple signatures. Large ones. Kravik barely glanced up. Reinforcements from nearby systems. The Veltharans are desperate enough to call in debts. He smiled, showing rows of sharp teeth. Let them come. We'll add their ships to the wreckage. Sir, these signatures don't match any known configuration in the database. The energy readings are... The officer's voice caught. Sir, they're human. The bridge fell silent. Kravik felt ice slide down his spine despite his battle-hardened exterior. Around him, his command staff exchanged glances heavy with sudden fear. How many? His voice came out rougher than intended. Scans show 63 capital ships. More appearing every moment. They're not even trying to hide their approach. Kravik moved to the tactical display, his confidence cracking. Human ships, the deadliest military force in known space. The species that fought like every battle was their last. He'd heard the stories, every soldier in the galaxy had, but he'd dismissed them as exaggerated warnings meant to scare lesser races. Prepare all weapons, he ordered, forcing strength into his voice. They're just another species. They bleed like everyone else. But even as he spoke, his hands trembled against the console. On Velthara's surface, Mira stood with Torvain in a reinforced shelter beneath the capital. Around them, thousands of Veltharans huddled in the darkness, their luminescent skin casting a pale glow across frightened faces. They're here, Mira whispered, checking her communicator. The fleet just entered the system. Torvain's hand found hers in the shadows. Over the past 3 days of hiding together, coordinating evacuations, sharing rations in the dark, something had shifted between them. In the face of extinction, barriers between species seemed meaningless. What happens now? He asked quietly. Now we stay down and pray we're far enough from the orbital battle. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not just an alien leader but someone who'd become impossibly dear in such a short time. Torvain, whatever happens up there, it's going to be brutal. More brutal than what we've endured. Different brutal. Mira moved closer, their shoulders touching in the cramped space. The Scarith are killing you slowly, savoring it. Humanity doesn't savor. We erase. Above them, the shelter's walls began to vibrate with distant impacts. The battle had begun. Elena watched the Scarith fleet through the Nightfall's view screen, counting their formations with a predator's patience. 43 ships remained in active combat status. They'd arranged themselves in a defensive sphere around Velthara, standard doctrine for siege operations. Marcus, execute pattern Omega-7, she ordered. All ships weapons-free. The human fleet split into 3 precise formations, each moving with mechanical efficiency. There was no hesitation, no dramatic speeches or demands for surrender. Humanity had learned long ago that talking to genocidal empires was a waste of oxygen. The first human volley lit up the void like a newborn star. Directed energy weapons, railgun slugs moving at relativistic speeds, and plasma torpedoes all converged on the Scarith positions simultaneously. 6 enemy ships simply ceased to exist, their atoms scattered across the orbital plane. 8 more suffered catastrophic damage, spinning away from formation as atmosphere vented from ruptured hulls. Enemy fleet breaking formation, Marcus reported, his voice steady despite the violence on screen. They're attempting to scatter. Don't let them. Elena's tone was ice. I want every ship tracked, every escape vector covered. The Nightfall surged forward, its massive engines pushing the dreadnought toward the enemy flagship. Around it, human fighters deployed like a swarm of mechanical wasps, each one piloted by someone who'd trained since childhood for exactly this kind of engagement. Kravik's voice suddenly crackled across open frequencies, speaking in broken common. Humans, we did not know this world was under your protection. We will withdraw. We will pay reparations. Elena didn't respond immediately. She watched 2 more Scarith cruisers explode under focused fire from the Valkyrie and Thunderchild. She watched enemy fighters attempting to flee only to be run down by human interceptors that moved with cold, efficient lethality. Finally, she opened a channel. General Kravik, this is Captain Elena Voss of the United Earth Defense Forces. You are correct about one thing, you didn't know. But ignorance isn't immunity. You chose genocide. You chose to murder an entire civilization. And now you get to learn what happens when humanity decides you've gone too far. Please. There is no please. There is no negotiation. There is only the end. She closed the channel and turned to Marcus. Target their command ship. Full broadside. Marcus's fingers moved across his console, and she saw something flicker in his eyes. Not doubt, but acknowledgement of what they were about to do. The Nightfall's main guns rotated, locking onto the Bleeding Fang. Firing solution locked, he confirmed. Fire. The Nightfall unleashed its full weapons array in a single devastating barrage. The Bleeding Fang shields flared brilliantly, held for 3 seconds, then collapsed. Hull plating vaporized, internal decks exposed to vacuum. The massive ship began to break apart, its spine snapping under the sheer force of human firepower. On the view screen, Elena watched escape pods launching from the dying ship. She said nothing, but her tactical officer understood. Human point defense systems tracked each pod, eliminating them with mechanical precision. Marcus looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw the question written across his face. The same question that had driven them apart. How do you sleep at night? She wanted to tell him the truth, that she didn't, not well. That every battle added weight to her soul. That she knew exactly what they were becoming with each trigger pull. But there were 2 million Veltharans cowering in shelters below, and 40 more Scarith ships still fighting. And the galaxy needed to remember that some lines couldn't be crossed without consequences. Helm, pursue the fleeing vessels, she ordered instead. Communications, broadcast to all Scarith ships. Surrender is not an option. Turn and fight or die running. The choice is yours, but the outcome is the same. The battle raged for another hour. It wasn't a fair fight. Humanity had long ago abandoned the concept of fairness in warfare. It was systematic elimination, each Scarith ship targeted and destroyed with brutal efficiency. In the shelter below, Mira held Torvain as the ground shook with orbital debris impacts. She felt him trembling against her, and she understood why. They weren't just hearing a battle. They were hearing the sound of humanity unleashed, proving every terrible story true. Is it over? Someone whispered in the darkness. Mira checked her communicator, seeing the tactical display update. 37 Scarith ships destroyed. 42. 43. The numbers climbed with mechanical regularity. Soon, she said softly, pulling Torvain closer. Soon it'll be over. But she knew the truth. The shooting would stop, yes. But the nightmares were just beginning. The price of victory, Lieutenant Marcus Flynn stood in the deployment bay of the Nightfall, watching his ground forces check their weapons with practiced efficiency. 200 soldiers in black combat armor, each one trained to operate in hostile environments, each one a specialist in close-quarters extermination. Listen up, Marcus addressed his troops, his voice amplified through the bay. Orbital bombardment has eliminated 90% of enemy positions. Our job is to clear the remaining 10%. Scarith survivors have retreated into the eastern mountain ranges and are using civilian populations as shields. Rules of engagement are simple. Positive identification before firing, but no hesitation once confirmed. These aren't soldiers defending their homeland. They're genocidal maniacs who've already murdered millions. Questions? A young corporal raised her hand. Sir, what about Scarith, who attempt to surrender? Marcus felt the weight of that question. He thought of Elena's orders, clear and uncompromising. He thought of the Veltharan bodies they'd found in mass graves during orbital scans. He thought of children executed for the crime of existing. Document the attempt, he said carefully. Then continue mission parameters. The corporal's expression didn't change, but Marcus saw the understanding there. There would be no prisoners today. The dropships launched, cutting through Velthara's atmosphere like falling stars. Marcus watched the planet grow larger through the viewport, seeing the scars of war written across its surface. Burned forests, cratered cities, rivers choked with ash. They landed in a valley 20 kilometers from the nearest shelter complex. The Scarith had fortified positions in the caves above, using Veltharan hostages as insurance against orbital strikes. Human forces! The voice came through on emergency frequencies, speaking in common. We have 300 civilians. Withdraw, or we execute them. Marcus signaled his squads to spread out, moving with silent precision up the mountain slopes. He opened a channel. This is Lieutenant Flynn. Release the hostages and we'll consider extraction terms. It was a lie. There would be no extraction, no terms. But lies bought time, and time let his soldiers get into position. We want ships. We want safe passage out of this system. Stand by. Marcus watched his tactical display as his team surrounded the cave complex. We're reviewing your request. On the Nightfalls Bridge, Elena monitored the ground operation with cold focus. She knew what Marcus was doing, the same thing she would do in his position. Buy time. Maneuver. Finish the job. Captain, her communications officer said quietly. Ambassador Ashton is requesting to speak with you. She says it's urgent. Elena sighed. Put her through. Mira's face appeared on screen, and Elena was struck by how exhausted the ambassador looked. There were dark circles under her eyes, and her usual diplomatic composure had cracked into something more raw. Captain, I'm hearing reports of ground operations. Tell me Marcus isn't planning what I think he's planning. The lieutenant is executing his mission parameters. Those Scarith have hostages, Elena. 300 civilians. You can't just... Can't what? Elena cut her off. Can't risk human lives trying to negotiate with terrorists? Can't let enemy combatants escape to kill again? Ambassador, those... Scarith knew exactly what they were doing when they took hostages. They're betting we value Veltharan lives more than completing our mission. And do we? Mira's voice was sharp. Or are we proving that humanity is exactly what the galaxy fears, monsters who see acceptable losses in every equation? Elena leaned forward, her voice dropping. You want to know what I see, Ambassador? I see that every Scarith we let escape is a future atrocity we've enabled. I see that mercy today means body counts tomorrow. And I see that sometimes the hardest choice is the only choice that actually saves lives in the long run. That's convenient logic when it's not you pulling the trigger. The words hit harder than Elena expected. She thought of Marcus down there, about to give orders that would haunt him. She thought of all the missions like this one, all the hard choices that turned good people into the kind of soldiers who could execute those choices without hesitation. No, Elena said quietly. It's not convenient, it's necessary, and it's why I don't sleep well at night. Now if you'll excuse me, I have a mission to oversee. She cut the connection and pulled up the ground operation feed. On screen, Marcus's forces were in position. In the mountain caves, Torvain watched the standoff unfold with growing horror. He'd insisted on accompanying the rescue teams, unable to hide in shelters while his people were used as shields. Now he crouched behind a rock formation with Mira, who'd refused to let him go alone. They're going to attack, Mira whispered, her hand gripping his tightly. Marcus won't negotiate. It's not how they operate. But the hostages, I know. Her voice broke slightly. I know. and it's eating me alive. But I've seen this before. Humanity doesn't compromise when it comes to eliminating threats. Torvain looked at her, this human woman who'd become his anchor in the storm, and saw tears threatening to spill from her eyes. She cared. These weren't the actions of monsters. They were the actions of people who'd been forced to make monstrous choices so often they'd become efficient at it. "Is this what you are?" he asked softly. "Is this what humans become?" "No," Mira said, pulling him closer as gunfire echoed through the valley. "This is what we become when we're forced to be. There's a difference, even if the galaxy can't see it." Marcus gave the order. His teams moved with surgical precision, breaching charges on 3 cave entrances simultaneously, flashbang grenades, precision fire that targeted Scarith positions while avoiding civilian clusters. It was over in 90 seconds. 273 hostages rescued, 27 killed in the crossfire, 42 Scarith eliminated. 3 attempted to surrender and were documented attempting surrender before being neutralized per mission parameters. Marcus stood in the aftermath, surrounded by freed Velthorans who looked at him with expressions caught between gratitude and terror. His armor was spattered with blood, not all of it enemy. His hands were steady, but inside he felt something crack just a little bit more. "Secure the area," he ordered. "Medics forward, start triage on the wounded." He opened a private channel to the Nightfall. "Captain, objective secured. Enemy combatants eliminated. Civilian casualties significant." Elena's voice came back quiet. "Understood, Lieutenant." "Well done." Marcus wanted to laugh at that. "Well done." As if there was anything good about what they'd just done. As if efficiency made it noble. "Permission to speak freely, Captain." "Granted." "How many more times?" His voice was raw. "How many more missions where we become exactly what they say we are? We just killed 3 Scarith who were trying to give up. We killed 27 civilians as acceptable losses. When does it stop?" Elena's pause was long enough that Marcus thought she might not answer. Then, "It stops when species like the Scarith stop existing, when the galaxy learns that genocide carries a price so high that no one dares pay it. That's the deal, Marcus. We're not heroes. We're the consequences. And if I can't live with being consequences anymore..." Another pause. "Then you transfer off my ship, and I find someone who can. But either way, the mission continues. Because if we stop, if we hesitate, then the next distress call goes unanswered and the next species dies completely instead of mostly. That's the math." Marcus closed his eyes, feeling Velthara's alien sun on his face. Around him, medical teams worked frantically to save lives his actions had endangered. In the distance, freed hostages wept with relief and trauma. "Acknowledged, Captain," he finally said. "Flynn out." He cut the connection and stood there, watching his soldiers help the survivors they'd risked everything to save, and wondered if Elena was right, wondered if being the galaxy's monster was better than letting the real monsters win. In the shelter, Mira held Torvain as news of the rescue spread. She felt him tremble against her, processing what humanity had done, saved his people while proving every terrible story true. "Thank you," he whispered against her shoulder. "And I'm sorry. Sorry that you have to be this. Sorry that the galaxy made you into something so necessary and so terrible." Mira didn't answer. She just held him tighter, knowing that after today, nothing between them, or between humanity and the rest of the galaxy, would ever be quite the same. Shadows of salvation. 6 months had passed since the last Scarith ship had burned in Velthara's orbit. The scars were healing, slowly. Crystal towers rose again from the rubble, not quite as beautiful as before, but standing nonetheless. Forests showed hints of green emerging from the ash. Children played in the reconstructed squares, though they never looked at the sky quite the same way. Mira stood on the balcony of the rebuilt council tower, watching the sunrise paint the horizon in shades of amber and gold. Behind her, she heard Torvain's footsteps. She'd learned to recognize his gait over the months of rebuilding, of late nights planning reconstruction, of slowly learning to be together in a world that no longer had to fear immediate destruction. "Can't sleep?" he asked, moving to stand beside her. His hand found hers automatically now, a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. Thinking, she admitted. The Nightfall leaves orbit today. Elena sent word they've completed their final security sweeps. Torvain was quiet for a moment. Will you go with them? It was the question that had hung between them for weeks. Mira's diplomatic posting had officially ended 3 months ago. Earth had sent new representatives to formalize relations with the grateful but traumatized Veltharans. She'd been recalled, her mission complete. If I go back, Mira said slowly, I return to a life where I write reports about acceptable casualties and strategic necessities, where I brief politicians on why humanity's reputation as monsters is actually a valuable deterrent, where I pretend that what I witnessed here was just another day in the life of an Earth diplomat. And if you stay. She turned to look at him, this alien man who'd become her home in ways she'd never expected. If I stay, I'm choosing to live with the consequences of what my species did. I'm choosing to help rebuild what human weapons destroyed, even while knowing that destruction saved you. Torvain pulled her closer, his silver skin warm in the morning light. You're choosing more than that. You're choosing us, this world, a life that doesn't require you to justify horror as policy. I'm choosing you, Mira corrected softly. Everything else, I'll figure out. They stood together, watching Velthara wake to another day it shouldn't have lived to see. On the Nightfall's bridge, Elena Voss reviewed the final reports with Marcus at her side. 6 months of patrol, of ensuring no Scarith reinforcements arrived, of watching the Veltharans rebuild under humanity's shadow. Ambassador Ashton has officially filed for residency status on Velthara, Marcus reported. She's not coming back with us, Elena nodded slowly. Can't say I'm surprised. She found something here worth more than wearing a uniform. Something we destroyed half a planet to give her, Marcus said quietly. Elena glanced at him. Over the past months, something had shifted between them too, not back to what they'd been, but forward into something more honest. They'd stopped pretending they were anything other than what they were, two people trying to carry the weight of necessary evils without being crushed by it. You're thinking about requesting a transfer, she said. It wasn't a question. Marcus looked surprised. How did you? Because I know you. And because I've been thinking about it too. Elena pulled up a star map, showing the vast territory of human-protected space. Every time we answer a distress call, we prove the galaxy right about us. We're efficient. We're deadly. We're everything they fear. But the alternative is letting species like the Scarith do whatever they want. It's letting genocide go unanswered because getting involved is messy. She looked at him fully now. I don't know if we're heroes or monsters, Marcus. Maybe we're both. Maybe that's the point. And you can live with that? Elena thought about all the battles, all the orders given, all the enemy ships destroyed with crews who probably had families and dreams and reasons to live beyond their government's atrocities. She thought about the Veltharan civilians who'd died in crossfire, acceptable losses in the math of war. I live with it because someone has to, she said finally. Because the day humanity stops answering these calls is the day the galaxy becomes a darker place. We're not perfect. We're not clean. But we're what stands between extinction and survival for worlds that can't stand for themselves. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. I'm not requesting a transfer. No? Shadows of Salvation. 6 months had passed since the last Scarith ship had burned in Velthara's orbit. The scars were healing slowly. Crystal towers rose again from the rubble, not quite as beautiful as before, but standing nonetheless. Forests showed hints of green emerging from the ash. Children played in the reconstructed squares, though they never looked at the sky quite the same way. Mira stood on the balcony of the rebuilt council tower, watching the sunrise paint the horizon in shades of amber and gold. Behind her, she heard Torvain's footsteps. She'd learned to recognize his gait over the months of rebuilding, of late nights planning reconstruction, of slowly learning to be together in a world that no longer had to fear immediate destruction. Can't sleep? He asked, moving to stand beside her. His hand found hers automatically now, a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. Thinking, she admitted. The Nightfall leaves orbit today. Elena sent word they've completed their final security sweeps. Torvain was quiet for a moment. Will you go with them? It was the question that had hung between them for weeks. Mira's diplomatic posting had officially ended 3 months ago. Earth had sent new representatives to formalize relations with the grateful but traumatized Veltherans. She'd been recalled, her mission complete. "If I go back," Mira said slowly, "I return to a life where I write reports about acceptable casualties and strategic necessities, where I brief politicians on why humanity's reputation as monsters is actually a valuable deterrent, where I pretend that what I witnessed here was just another day in the life of an Earth diplomat. And if you stay..." She turned to look at him, this alien man who'd become her home in ways she'd never expected. "If I stay, I'm choosing to live with the consequences of what my species did. I'm choosing to help rebuild what human weapons destroyed, even while knowing that destruction saved you." Torvain pulled her closer, his silver skin warm in the morning light. "You're choosing more than that. You're choosing us, this world, a life that doesn't require you to justify horror as policy. I'm choosing you," Mira corrected softly. "Everything else, I'll figure out." They stood together, watching Veltara wake to another day it shouldn't have lived to see. On the Nightfall's bridge, Elena Voss reviewed the final reports with Marcus at her side. 6 months of patrol, of ensuring no Scarith reinforcements arrived, of watching the Veltharans rebuild under humanity's shadow. "Ambassador Ashton has officially filed for residency status on Velthara," Marcus reported. "She's not coming back with us." Elena nodded slowly. "Can't say I'm surprised. She found something here worth more than wearing a uniform. Something we destroyed half a planet to give her," Marcus said quietly. Elena glanced at him. Over the past months, something had shifted between them too. Not back to what they'd been, but forward into something more honest. They'd stopped pretending they were anything other than what they were, two people trying to carry the weight of necessary evils without being crushed by it. "You're thinking about requesting a transfer," she said. It wasn't a question. Marcus looked surprised. "How did you—" "Because I know you, and because I've been thinking about it too." Elena pulled up a star map, showing the vast territory of human-protected space. "Every time we answer a distress call, we prove the galaxy right about us. We're efficient. We're deadly. We're everything they fear. But the alternative is letting species like the Scarith do whatever they want. It's letting genocide go unanswered because getting involved is messy." She looked at him fully now. "I don't know if we're heroes or monsters, Marcus. Maybe we're both. Maybe that's the point. And you can live with that." Elena thought about all the battles, all the orders given, all the enemy ships destroyed with crews who probably had families and dreams and reasons to live beyond their government's atrocities. She thought about the Veltharan civilians who'd died in crossfire, acceptable losses in the math of war. "I live with it because someone has to," she said finally. "Because the day humanity stops answering these calls is the day the galaxy becomes a darker place. We're not perfect. We're not clean. But we're what stands between extinction and survival for worlds that can't stand for themselves." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "I'm not requesting a transfer, no.